Good morning everyone, how are you going? My name is James and I suspect that you're here today for a couple of reasons. I wonder whether you're here because you've got some young people in your business context and you'd like to see how you can meaningfully engage with them. I wonder whether you are in a church context and there were lots of young people there in that space, maybe when you were growing up, and now when you're hanging out in the church you notice that there aren't as many young people that there used to be, and there seems to be a bit of a disconnect with young people, and you're interested in perhaps re-engaging with young people. Hoping today that I can help both of those spaces and give you a couple of little tips and tools of how to maybe re-engage with young people. For me, this journey started a couple of years ago. I've been doing youth ministry for a number of years, and I ran a small group for a bunch of kids who were scallywags and misfits. They were on the fringe. I had 2 kids in the guardianship of the minister. I had a Hindu, I had a Sikh, and I had 2 other kids who had no faith background. We ran an outreach youth ministry with them on a Friday night. And they were coming in and they really engaged with what we were doing. And what I noticed when we started to use some of the resources that are out there to help young people begin to explore faith, I noticed something that I hadn't seen before, and that was that the way that we were engaging with these young people, I was just going straight over their heads. And they were giving me these blank stares and these blank faces. And what I started to notice was what I needed to do was provide a lot of context for these young people to be able to begin to understand the language that we were using. And so I would start prefacing these videos with 5 minutes and then 10 minutes and then 20 minutes, trying to help them to understand all of the jargon and all of the Christianese that often gets thrown into a lot of our resources and a lot of the assumed knowledge. And I was going, what could we do with these young people? And so one day while I was thinking about this and praying about this, there was a small soft whisper where I felt led to begin to create something that would help them meaningfully explore their faith journey and help them to begin to discover something and meet them where they're at rather than where we'd like to be. And so that's the journey that I've been on. I'm going to share a little bit more about that. But I wonder whether it's a bit like we're not in Kansas anymore when you're with the young people. A couple of years ago in our house we had we removed all of the carpet in our house. And so bare bones, all of the furniture had to get moved out, and we played this kind of musical chairs of furniture. If you've ever redecorated or done something like this, I imagine you've had the same thing where you've painted. So we removed all of the carpet. All of our rooms except for the kitchen and the bathroom had carpet in them. So this was a massive undertaking. And as we did that, there were these bare bones floorboards there, and the rooms were empty as we got some floating floorboards put in. And Tim Keller talks about this as the experience that a lot of people are having at the moment when they think about trying to engage with young people. There's this experience that the mental furniture, the existential furniture that we've assumed as followers of Jesus for a long time is no longer there for the young people that we're engaging with. So Tim Keller talks about this idea that there are 4 assumptions that we used to be able to make about people when we were talking with them about our faith. The first was we could assume that everyone believed that there was a God. So that was a common experience that most people had. We could assume that everyone believed that there was an afterlife. We could assume that everyone believed that there were moral absolutes in the world. That there was a set of universal laws or principles that were always true, there were always rights, and they were always wrong. And we could always assume that we had some sort of awareness of that, and the fact that our lives didn't make sense in that space, and that we weren't living up to these kind of moral codes that we saw in the world. And Tim Keller said, this is the mental existential furniture that so much of our evangelism, so much of our gospel energy, so much of the way that we have presented who Jesus is has flowed through for the last 50 years. And that might have been your experience as you've grown up. You might have come to faith with a deep awareness of the fact that you came to an awareness that God does exist, and that there is a relationship with Him that you want to have forever, and that you realise that there's a set of laws that He's created, and that you know that you haven't quite met them, and that you want to be made right with God. That sounds like a tried and true road that we've paved our kind of gospel energy over the last 50 years. But what he mentioned to everyone and pointed out was things have changed, and the furniture has shifted for young people. And those assumptions that we have paved well and truly for the last 50 or so years can't be assumed anymore for young people. So when you think about a young person, not every young person believes that God exists. In fact, the latest census data suggests that things are changing very quickly in Australia. We know that not every young person believes that there's an afterlife. A lot of young people believe that this is all there is, and so their life is about trying to maximise their enjoyment while they're here. So there are phrases like FOMO and here for a good time, not for a long time. These are some of the things that young people are saying. We know that young people don't necessarily believe that there are moral absolutes anymore, and if they do, they're their moral absolutes. I have arrived at the peak morality. My morality is right to the extent that you agree with me, and everything that you disagree with me, well, you're just wrong. So things have changed. We're not in Kansas anymore. And going further on that, young people don't believe that there's something that they're missing. They believe that they've arrived in the world. And so things have shifted very quickly. And so it's a bit like a kink in a pipeline. We've continued to explain and to explore faith in a way with young people that's in that old way of thinking. And so often what ends up happening is there's a kink in the pipe. We explain faith in a way that we understand and that we've been presented to us. But for so many of these young people, because this isn't the existential furniture that they have, what we're saying to them is complete jargon. It doesn't make sense. It goes straight over their heads. And we can be very well-meaning and very loving about what we're doing. We're not trying to force people or twist people's arms or do any of these kind of things. But because of the fact that our language and our cultural space has shifted, there's a profound disconnect, and that's unfortunate. So for young people instead, and this might be helpful for you, here are the beliefs that they have. Here are their cultural beliefs. Number one, you've got to be true to yourself. Have you heard this phrase around the place for young people? You've got to be yourself. Number two, in the end, you have to do what makes you happy. Right? We're here for a good time, not a long time. Right? These are the kind of things that young people are saying. You've got to do what makes you happy. Number three, no one has the right to tell someone else what is right or wrong for others. This is summed up for young people by you do you. Have you heard this phrase? You do you. I've often been fascinated by what that actually means. And number four, you're free to live however you want as long as you don't harm others. So you can do whatever you like, but as long as it's not harming other people, that's completely okay. So two things have actually happened. The first thing is that our paradigm has shifted in the way that we think, and the second thing that's happened is that our cultural assumptions are different. Now, I think there's two ways to think about this shift that's actually taken place. It's a generational shift. We can think about this very concerned and be very worried about the fact that young people are not thinking the same way that we are, that our gospel energy isn't being maximised. A lot of books talk about the fact that we're now in this period of Babylon, that we've been culturally exiled as Christians. Have you heard this? Have you experienced this? And I think that language is particularly helpful, especially in other cultures like America, where there was this kind of cultural sense of Christianity and Christendom that's existed. But I wonder whether it'd be really helpful if we thought about this as an opportunity. What if we didn't think about ourselves as being in Babylon, in exile as a culture? What if we saw ourselves as being in the first century in Rome? Yeah. Where there's a cultural pluralism that now exists, where there's an opportunity, instead of being the dominant culture, there's actually now an opportunity to come and play for everyone to share their faith. And so all beliefs are equalised, and everyone has an opportunity to be able to share their beliefs. And we believe, as followers of Jesus, that we have a better story. Yeah. That our story is better. We believe that there's an encounter with someone that we can have that will change our lives forever. And so we don't need to worry about kind of having the truth bashed, because we believe that our story is going to change lives because there's an encounter with the risen Lord Jesus, right? So if we did see ourselves as in Babylon, as in exile, and worrying about this, all of a sudden there's this wonderful opportunity that opens up. And the latest McCrinder research actually shows that young people in this Gen Z demographic, they're actually more interested in exploring spirituality than any other generation that's previously passed. And so we make this assumption that young people are not interested in exploring spirituality, that they don't have spiritual questions. But the reality is, because of the way the world is, everyone is spiritual. And everyone has deep questions about the way that the world is. And everyone wants to have meaning, purpose and belonging. That hasn't changed. Nothing's shifted. And in fact, what's changing is that young people are now more interested than ever before about these things, because there's been a whole cultural past where these things haven't been talked about or haven't been explored. And now there's this massive opportunity where there's no knowledge all of a sudden, and no assumed knowledge, and no institutionalism that the young people are particularly concerned about. And so there's this profound opportunity that we have with this group of people to be able to meaningfully explore faith with them. Now that might mean we need to ask them different questions, and it might mean that we need to meet them where they're at. But all of a sudden, this moment of the skies falling in gets reshifted, and it's this opportunity that we have for the first time to be able to meaningfully explore Jesus like the first century did, without the cultural baggage and all of the cultural assumptions. And I go, what an amazing opportunity that could be. What would that look like if we were able to re-engage with young people that way? That could be significant, and that could be profound. So like Simon was talking about, it's a bit of a perspective shift. We need to shift our perspective. There's two things that need to happen. We need to shift the way we communicate. So the way that we communicate needs to be different with young people. So I'm going to show you something. Where did we get to on this? Here we go, perfect. Everyone see that? This is a bloke out of the US called Children. He's written a wonderful book. This is a generational paradigm. And so for older generations, the profound cultural question that they had was, is this true? Right, there's a question about, is it true or not? And so you saw in the early 50s and things like that, gospel presentations often emphasised questions around, did Jesus really rise from the dead? And that was the question that a lot of people had. They wanted to know whether the story that they had about Jesus could be was true. And so there was a lot of energy that went into explaining why something was true. Yes, this really happened. Here's what the archaeological evidence says. Here's what, if we actually analyse the testimonies of the people that were said, here's what we can know about the real resurrected Jesus. And there are other truth questions that the people had about the Bible that sat in that space. For Gen X, the question was, does it work? Is it real? Right? And so this is where you see the advent in a lot of churches, and this might be familiar to you today. A lot of the preaching that exists are tips that help you to make your life better. They're practical. We're looking for practical questions. How does it work? How does prayer actually work? You find yourself asking that question. How does it work to actually be filled with the Spirit? What does that mean? How does it work to actually show peace, patience, and kindness? How do I forgive? Right? And so there's these practical tips that we're looking for because we're looking to engage with the how does it work? That's the Gen X question. And I'd say a lot of our preaching and a lot of our church communities are still emphasised in that space because that's the primary group of people that they're talking to. But for Gen Z and Gen Y, something's shifted. Right? The question is no longer is it true or how does it work? The question is it better? So remember, they're in that comparative space. They're in that comparative space where they're comparing and contrasting a bunch of different stories that they're engaging with, and what they're looking for is the better. So the question isn't necessarily, is it true or is it real? They don't care whether Jesus did actually rise from the dead. But that's not a primary concern for them. They want to know, how does the resurrection make my life better? How is this a better story than all of the other stories that are going around? Why does Jesus' resurrection change the world? Oh, so it's a profoundly different question that's going there. And so it's the same gospel. Nothing's shifted there. I'm not suggesting we throw out the baby with the bathwater. What I'm saying is there's a different cultural in, and there's a different cultural into the same question of what does the resurrection mean. Right? Now I'm going to give you a hint. This is where I think it's going next. Right? So for the next generation of young people, beyond Gen Z, Gen Alpha, if they're starting to talk about this is the first generation of people who will be completely digitally native. The question is not, is it better, but it'll be, is it beautiful? Right? And so the question will be, what is the story that's most beautiful? What's the story that allows me to engage with the beauty of the world? And I think what we're going to start to see in the next 20 or so years is an insight that's very similar to the kind of Celtic spirituality and mysticism of the 13th and 14th century. And we're already starting to see what's really interesting. Have you noticed, in the last 5 or so years, the Jordan Peterson phenomenon, the 12 rules of living, that these kind of things are starting to come up? What happens is in moments of chaos and shifting that we're already in, a lot of young people are actually looking for ways to actually see the world and enter into the world. And so for the first time you have speakers like John Mark Homer talking about spiritual disciplines all over again. Now that wasn't something that anyone taught me when I grew up. That wasn't something that was kind of on point. Disciplines, that's a disgusting word for my generation. What's really interesting is for this generation who are starting to bridge the better beautiful kind of divide. What's really interesting is these are the things they're looking for. They're looking for a rule of life because there's chaos in the world and in their worldview. They know that their worldview isn't working. They know that things aren't quite living up. They know that you do you isn't working. They know that they're trying to be themselves, but they have no idea who they are. They know that, for example, that no one has the right to tell someone else what is right or wrong, but yet there's this deep feeling that there are these things that are intrinsically wrong in the world. But they no longer have a basis for where that comes from. So they're looking for these pillars and these rules of life, these spaces and places, these tried and true ways, these wisdom traditions that can help them explore and navigate faith and spirituality in life. It's a very different way of thinking to the way that we've grown up with and the way that our churches are kind of positioned and paradigmed. So that's a really, really interesting way to think about this. Another thing that I might show you that might be helpful for you, this is an ankle scale. This might be familiar to some people. This is an evangelism tool. But what's really interesting about this is when we talk about faith, the ankle scale was originally written as a 0, -8, a vague awareness of God. That's where they assumed the kind of primary endpoint was for most people. They said everyone has a vague awareness of God, all the way up to reproduction, the idea that you might be sharing your faith with other people. But what's really interesting is in the last 15 years, they've had to go back and go, actually, we know that there's lots of people that are actually all the way off the end of the scale. So we've actually had to come up with -10 and -12, and even further down than that. And so what we're observing is for young people, most of the resources that help them explore faith and navigate faith, and most of our gospel presentations are pitched somewhere around here in this considering faith space. Which is really interesting because most of the young people that we're talking to are probably all the way down over here. Yeah. They're in that cynical, hostile space. They may be vaguely indifferent, they just don't care. I deal with a lot of teenagers, and often I get these kind of looks. Do you ever get these people? These are the young people I'm engaging with. I get the scallywags who are just, will make a mess of things. I get the kids who are completely unimpressed. I get the kids who are outright hostile. They're just like, this is ridiculous, I don't want to talk about this. And I just get the kids who are just indifferent, they're somewhere else. I thought you would enjoy that. So it's not just not what we're communicating and how we're sharing the gospel, but it's also the how. So we know this is a digitally native generation. That's not something that we're particularly perturbed about. We know this about these young people. But how we need to communicate with them needs to shift as well. So it's not just a how. It's not just a what, but a how. So that means we need to meet them where they're at. They're digitally native. We need to come up with digital resources that help them explore faith. We need to meet them in the apps and programs that they're using. We need to build relationships with them in those spaces that helps them meaningfully engage with young people there. And so what we've been working on at XP is a resource that helps young people explore faith and meet them where they're at. And ask those questions, if I was to go over to here again, ask those questions down this end of the scale that helps them to kind of build that relationship, build that perspective, and begin to engage meaningfully with where they're at. So I'm going to show you a teaser trailer, and then if I've got a little bit of time, JJ, what are we looking at? Okay, so I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to show you the teaser trailer, and then I'm going to pinch a little bit of time just to give you a few little quick tips that might help you re-engage with those young people in that space. a set of digital resources that can help young people explore faith in that space where they're at. And that's what we're kind of building and working towards at the moment, and we're hoping that they'll be released next year. And I'll talk a little bit about that just right at the end. But here's 3 things that I think might really help you as you're thinking about those people in your churches and in your business world that might help you to explore. The first thing, narratives and stories are powerful. Young people are really engaged at the moment with stories, and if you can share stories of your own personal faith journey, as opposed to trying to convince them of something. I spent a lot of it. Sam was actually one of my teachers at high school, and Sam would know that I spent a lot of my energy in high school trying to convince people that Jesus was the way, and I wish I'd just listened to people more and shared stories. I spent a lot of time using apologetics because I thought that's what I was taught. Right? I used a lot of apologetics, it didn't work. Had a lot of arguments, nothing worked. All right, share stories. Just share a story about how God's working in your life, and listen to their stories as well. A lot of young people have questions. The Barna research that's come out of America says that one of the reasons why young people are disengaging with faith is because there isn't a space for them to ask honest questions. Could you create a space for them to be able to ask questions and acknowledge that there might be different questions to the questions that you have, and what might that look like? Sometimes you might encounter someone who doesn't have a faith background at all, and they say, I don't believe in God. One of the things you could go back to them is potentially say, look, tell me about the God that you don't believe in. Yeah. There's a fair chance I probably don't believe in that God either. And that could be just a really simple way of taking the heat out of the conversation with those people who are very angry. And there's usually a reason why they're angry. And if you were to slow down and listen to their story, you might actually find why it is that they have that anger that they have, why it is that they have that kind of militant disposition that they often do. So that might be helpful. And the third is find the space. For young people, there aren't too many spaces to explore faith and spirituality. I lived in Indonesia, and I was used to my taxi driver. He'd ask me 2 questions. When I was, different taxi driver every single time. The first question would be, tell me a bit about your family. And then the second question would be, tell me a bit about your faith. And so that was the opening introduction questions. Now that wouldn't happen in Australian culture. That would be bizarre if someone asked you those kind of questions. So for young people, it's about trying to find the right space to help them explore these questions. And so that means meeting them where they're at. And I have a hunch that for the young people these days, spaces like camping and where they can go out into nature and begin to wonder and explore, those might be the spaces where they're still engaging, where things start to slow down, their phones die, the batteries finally die on their phones, and they've got the permission to go out and explore. They see the stars, and they start asking those questions and go, what is all of this? I have a hunch that that's the space where young people are still natively asking these kind of big questions. And so that means actually finding ways to be able to meet them where they're at, as opposed to kind of shirt fronting them in spaces and places where they're not necessarily wanting to have a kind of spiritual conversation. Well-meaning, there are charities that meet you in Westwood Marion, and they've got their signs and their placards, and they want to sign you up to a particular program, and that's wonderful. But I wonder what their success rate is in that space. And sometimes I get grumpier when I'm accosted by those people in that space because they've come at me. And I'm going, I'm here to shop. That's my thing. That's my headspace. I'm not here to do other things. This is an awkward experience. And I wonder whether it's the same thing for the young people, where you have to meet them where they're at and find the spaces and places where they're natively exploring these questions. So as we wrap up, we're on a journey to help meaningfully explain the gospel to young people and help them explore and encounter Jesus for the first time. And we'd love you to jump on board with what we're doing. And if there's a space and place to join our prayer team, we'd love you to do that. If you're someone that's serious about prayer, and I mean that all with the best intentions, we'd love you to join our prayer team. We send out a prayer update each week with a few short updates. That would be wonderful. And if you'd love to help explore supporting us elsewhere, we'd love to talk to you about what that might look look like financially as we look to kind of put this resource together. We want to help young people explore faith, and we want them to be able to do that, and we want to be able to have it for free. So that they can, I don't believe anyone should have to pay for a presentation of the gospel. The gospel's free, Jesus is free. And so I think in the same way that Paul was asking people to support him in his mission, this is one of those opportunities where I go, hey, if this is something you're passionate about, I'd love to talk to you. And if there's another mission that you're passionate about, I'd love to talk to you about that as well, because we want to find where the kingdom of God meets your heart. So that would be wonderful. And if there's young people that you know in your church, or you have youth pastors, this might be something that you might want to share with them. So those are the three ways I'd really love you to consider supporting us and considering helping where this goes next. So thank you so much for your time, Stephen. Thank you for your wonderful, generous hospitality and inviting me here today. I hope there's been something in there that's been helpful for you. Thank you.